Executions are meant to be final, but when the rifles shake, when the shooters flinch, or when orders are given without mercy or precision, death doesn't always come cleanly. Throughout history, the firing squad has been hailed as swift, but for some, it was anything but. These are the forgotten men, those whose final moments were dragged out in pain, confusion, and sometimes terrifying silence. In this video, we revisit the haunting realities of botched executions by firing squad, where justice turned chaotic and death lost its dignity. If stories like these stay with you, subscribe and stay close. What you're about to hear is more than just history. It's a warning echoing through time. One such story begins not in a battlefield or prison, but in a land torn by rebellion. The year was 1870, the place, Canada's Red River Settlement, and the man was Thomas Scott, a 28-year-old laborer whose death would become one of the most controversial in the nation's history. But controversy aside, the moment the rifles were raised, what happened next revealed everything that could go wrong when bullets are meant to silence a man forever and fail. Thomas Scott was born in 1842 in the Clandeboy area of County Down, Ireland, an Ulsterman raised as a Presbyterian in a land divided by deep religious and political rifts. Like many others of his time, Scott sought new opportunities in the burgeoning Canadian territories and emigrated to Ontario in 1863 at the age of 21. He was hardworking, restless, and intensely opinionated. After arriving in Canada, he took on laboring jobs, most notably working on the ambitious Dawson Road project, a vital infrastructure project intended to connect the Red River settlement to Lake Superior. But Scott wasn't just a man with a shovel. He had a fire in him and a sense of loyalty to British ideals that ran deep. He also had a temper. His involvement in a labor strike on the Dawson Road project in 1869, one that turned violent, resulted in him being fired and later convicted of aggravated assault. The event didn't slow him down. Instead, it seemed to light a match. Scott moved to Winnipeg shortly after, where he met John Christian Schultz, a prominent figure and leader of the pro-Canadian Canadian Party. Schultz was charismatic, politically driven, and firmly opposed to the Métis leadership of the Red River settlement. Under Schultz's influence, Scott found purpose in politics, and he found an enemy in Louis Riel. The Red River Rebellion had begun. Riel, a Métis leader and visionary, sought to defend the rights of the Métis people, many of whom were of mixed Indigenous and European descent. The Métis feared annexation by the Canadian government would destroy their land rights and way of life. So Riel formed a provisional government in 1869 and seized Fort Garry, the Hudson's Bay Company trading post that served as the administrative heart of the settlement. Scott, by then steeped in anti-Riel sentiment, joined a group of Canadian Party sympathizers who barricaded themselves in Schultz's warehouse. Riel's forces surrounded and arrested the group, including Scott, and imprisoned them in Upper Fort Garry. But Scott, ever defiant, managed to escape in January of 1870. He fled with Schultz and others and began rallying volunteers to retake the fort by force. At one point, nearly 600 men assembled near Kildonan Presbyterian Church, preparing to launch an offensive. However, the plan collapsed. Riel released his remaining prisoners to de-escalate tensions, and the volunteers disbanded. Scott, undeterred, headed to Portage-la-Prairie, but in a fatal miscalculation, he passed too close to Fort Garry and was recaptured. This time, there would be no escape. Back in custody, Scott became a thorn in the side of Riel's men. He was loud, argumentative, openly mocked the authority of the provisional government, and insulted his guards daily. Suffering from diarrhea during his imprisonment, Scott's physical discomfort only seemed to amplify his abrasive behavior. Fellow prisoners even requested he be isolated because he was so disruptive. One altercation with a group of guards ended with Scott beaten and locked in a separate cell with stronger restraints, for his own safety as much as theirs. Then came the trial, or at least what passed for one. The proceedings were held behind closed doors by a small group of Métis without public oversight. The accusations? Insubordination, assaulting guards, verbally attacking Riel, and refusing to recognize the authority of the provisional government. According to later accounts, Scott wasn't even present during much of the trial. The charges were read to him later, translated into English by Riel himself. Despite multiple prisoners being sentenced to death, only one sentence would be carried out. On March 4, 1870, Thomas Scott was marched out of the east gate of Upper Fort Garry. A crowd of about 100 people had gathered to witness what many saw as a symbolic moment of justice, or a blatant act of political murder. Accounts of what happened next vary wildly, depending on whom you ask. Some said Scott knelt in the snow, blindfolded, fervently praying in his final moments. Others claim he was defiant, shouting about the injustice of his execution and cursing Riel and the Métis. He was placed in front of a firing squad composed of Métis men, many of whom it was said were intoxicated. Armed with ordinary muskets, the men took aim from a distance of 60 meters. When the volley was fired, only 2 bullets reportedly hit Scott, one in the shoulder and one in the chest. He fell but did not die. One of the Métis men approached and fired a pistol at close range into Scott's cheek, the bullet exiting near his nose. And still, he did not die. Scott was placed in a coffin, a rough box, supposedly built from a fruit tree crate, but Scott was still alive. Cries were heard from inside. "For God's sake, take me out of here or kill me." 5 hours passed. Major George Robinson would later tell Reverend George Young that he and Riel returned to the room where Scott's coffin lay, only to hear the dying man begging to be finished off. Robinson fled the room. Riel stayed. Moments later, a final gunshot rang out. Scott's death was complete at last. But even that version of events is murky. Some believed Robinson's account was tainted, as he had recently been fired from his post as editor of Riel's newspaper. Whether out of revenge or truth-telling, we may never know. What is certain is that Thomas Scott's execution shocked Ontario. News of the botched, prolonged death of a Protestant Orangeman by a Métis-led government ignited a firestorm. English Canada viewed him as a martyr. The Canadian government, pressured by the public and Protestant leaders, dispatched the Wolseley Expedition, an armed military force allegedly intended to protect against American encroachment, but in reality aimed to crush Riel's provisional government. By the time they arrived in August, Riel had fled into exile. Scott's body was never recovered. A group of men returned to the supposed burial site later that year and found only a small box filled with dirt and wood shavings, far too small to hold Scott's 6 feet 2 inches frame. Rumors emerged that his body had been chained and dumped in the frozen Red River or hidden beneath the floorboards of a saloon. A skeleton would later be unearthed during roadwork, sparking fresh speculation that it might be Scott's remains. But to this day, no one knows for sure. The legacy of Thomas Scott is tangled and divided. English Protestants hailed him as a victim of savagery, a man murdered for standing up for Queen and country. French Canadians and Métis sympathizers painted him as a belligerent agitator who pushed Riel and his men too far. Some called him a hero. Others saw him as a nuisance, a drunk, even a bully who brought his fate upon himself. What can't be denied is this: Scott's execution was a turning point in Canadian history. It hardened the lines between English and French, Protestant and Catholic, settler and indigenous. It destroyed Riel's political legitimacy in the eyes of many in Ontario, and it became a symbol of grievance, of colonialism, and of the growing pains of a young nation trying to decide who it was. Scott's ghost would haunt Riel for the rest of his life. 15 years later, when Riel was captured and tried for treason following the Northwest Rebellion, it was Ontario's memory of Thomas Scott that sealed his fate. Despite pleas for clemency, Riel was hanged in 1885. In the end, both men, Riel and Scott, became martyrs to different causes. And their conflict, born of clashing identities, still echoes in Canada's collective memory. A single death on a cold March day, a coffin, maybe empty, a nation forever changed. Thank you for watching. If these forgotten moments from history speak to you the way they do to us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. There are more stories coming, some tragic, some haunting, and all real. Until next time, stay curious and stay aware.